And I'm Michael Casey. Decentralized all the things. That meme became popular more than 5 years ago as Ethereum and other early crypto projects first floated the idea that new decentralized applications could take blockchain technology far beyond Bitcoin's digital currency use case. But achieving this sweeping objective is far more easily said than done. In fact, it has arguably been made harder by the parallel growth of Ethereum and various other competing blockchains, so-called layer one protocols such as Solana and Algorand, because of the lack of interoperability between them. We've evolved into a world of separately siloed blockchains, which, even if many are in and of themselves decentralized, means that the overall digital asset ecosystem is not. You can't move your ETH from Ethereum into an AVAX transaction on Avalanche, not without the intervention of a trusted intermediary, in other words, a centralized solution. Seen from this 30,000-foot view, the blockchain world, with its promise of a Web3 future in which we control all our own assets, actually looks quite similar to the current Web2 world, with its siloed social media and internet platforms whose systems don't talk to each other. The problem has not been lost on blockchain developers, and it has been an especially big concern for today's guest, one of the industry's most influential developers, Gavin Wood. Gavin was a co-founder of Ethereum and the project's chief technology officer. He later founded Parity Technologies, which initially developed software for Ethereum, but after his departure from the Ethereum Foundation in 2016, went on a different path. Parity's most important output now is Polkadot, an ambitious project that seeks to address this interoperability problem. The principles behind it are core to Gavin's vision for Web3, an idea that he repopularized and gave a crypto edge to with the founding of the Web3 Foundation. Before Gavin joins us to discuss the prospects of a truly decentralized internet, let's welcome Sheila Warren, who made some news of her own this week. For those who don't yet know, Sheila is no longer with the World Economic Forum, as she has assumed the role of CEO of the Crypto Council for Innovation. Sheila Warren, congratulations.
Thanks, Michael. New week, new title, new role.
Yeah, that's easy, right? It's not like you're busy, there's nothing going on.
No.
Tell us basically what the council does and quickly what your role is going to be.
Yeah, well, I am the CEO, so I'm going to be heading up this group of really talented, dedicated industry leaders to help make the case, to really land the case with policymakers, with regulators, with people all over the world, that crypto is not only here to stay, but that it is a tremendous engine for opportunity, economic growth, inclusion, all the things that we talk about on the show. So yeah, I'm really excited about it. We're recording on day 2 of the job. So I'm really excited that I have a Zoom account and I have email. That seems like a huge off to the right start right now. Exactly. But yeah, it was just time, I think, to jump in with both feet and really try to do everything I can to help really make the case and advocate here on behalf of the whole ecosystem.
Well, hopefully a lot of the conversations you and I have had over the last year and a half with all sorts of interesting figures around regulation and the future of this technology is going to be pretty valuable for you as you get these policymakers to see the light. Okay, so why don't we bring Gavin in? Gavin Wood, welcome to Money Reimagined.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. So, before we get into how Polkadot works and the ins and outs, technology and so forth, tell us, what brought you to want to create it? What were the motives behind this project after you left the Ethereum Foundation?
Much the same as the motives that drove me to pick up Ethereum back in late 2013. It's kind of desire to build, but also curiosity. I wanted to see if an idea could work.
What's the essence of that idea then, right? What you see, interoperability is a piece of this. What's the big solution you're trying to get to here?
Yeah, I mean, why did we go down the Ethereum road? It was really, I think one of the early sort of propositions was that this was a platform on which we would do the social experiments of the 21st century. And I quite, this was something that sort of resonated with me. It's the same thing, basically. I wanted to build a better platform for doing these social experiments. And, there were a bunch of things that I felt could be improved, that I felt, blockchain platforms at the time were not really we're not really doing very well, or that certainly could have been done better. And with Polkadot, I really wanted to start afresh and see if we could really really solve a lot of these fundamental problems.
So talk to us about how Polkadot works. Maybe you can talk about parachains and just the fundamental mechanics behind it, and try to be as layperson friendly as possible, please.
Sure. Yeah, it's not so easy. So I guess the first thing to say is Polkadot's a meta protocol. Now, what this means is that it's not like a fixed protocol like Ethereum or Bitcoin. It's a protocol that can evolve over time and change. So it's basically got a very, very thin layer on the bottom, which is called, basically it's like WebAssembly and libp2p, two relatively widely accepted technologies, WebAssembly especially. And that's basically what Polkadot's like built on. And everything that's built on top of this is very easy to change and evolve. So, in this sense, we've kind of future-proofed Polkadot. Now, beyond that, it's like, well, how do we decide how it's going to change and evolve? So the next element of Polkadot is really governance. It's like, we've got this decentralized decision-making mechanism. We don't want to be like centered around any particular individual, no matter how benevolent and wise they may be. It's still a critical risk for a system that is ultimately built to be beyond any individual person or organization. So we want to make sure that the decision-making process is similarly decentralized, and that's where the governance comes in. So how do we decide to update Polkadot? How do we decide what should come in, what should go out, whether some particular mistake should be corrected or whatever else it may be? We have a clear and like inherently enforced protocol process on this. I think that's very important, because all this off-chain stuff ultimately puts the power in relatively opaque, shady decision-making practices that are just not transparent, and oftentimes it's not clear exactly who's calling the shots. So that brings us then on to like, well, okay, we've got the ability to evolve, and we understand that we want to like make it, ensure that it's there's a large sort of stakeholder group that's involved in these sorts of decisions. But what does it actually do? Well, this is where we say, well, Polkadot's a layer 0 platform. So you've talked about layer 1. So you got like Ethereum, it's the obvious layer 1. There are a few others that seek to sort of compete with Ethereum. Well, we don't really compete directly with Ethereum. Ethereum's a smart contract platform, and smart contracts have, they are a particular sort of product or service that you might want if, for various reasons that I'm sure Ethereum's current adherents will be very pleased to tell you about. But what we want to do with Polkadot is build what might be otherwise considered a decentralized application platform. Ethereum, I remember in late 2015 in New York, I sort of talked at a meetup calling Ethereum this kind of world computer. The sort of notion caught on in sort of Ethereum's blockchain marketing, and it was sort of eventually became known as that. But really, I sort of beg to differ in retrospect. I don't think it really is the world computer. I don't think it sort of delivers that purpose. It is a smart contract platform, and as such, it does do computation as a service, but it's quite a different proposition to what we would normally consider as a computer. When I if I have a computer, I expect to be able to sort of use my computer for, if I rent a computer, at least if I lease a computer, I expect to be able to sort of use it for a period of time before giving up again. Ethereum doesn't really deliver that. Furthermore, if I lease a computer and someone else is using whatever it is that I'm running on the computer, then I normally don't have to expose them to whoever like the currency or platform restrictions of whoever it is that I'm renting the computer from. Normally, I'm able to resell services that I run on the computer without restriction. And that, again, that's not really how smart contract platforms work. They work by ensuring that all of the users actually have to have the platform token to use the smart contracts that have been deployed on the smart contract platform. So it really doesn't, there is sort of this forced intermediation of the smart contract platform that prevents it really from, in my mind, really being a true decentralized applications platform. So with Polkadot, we wanted to change this, effectively giving economic freedom to the applications that were deployed on it. So applications didn't have to use, for example, the platform's DOT token and force it onto their users, or indeed force any token onto their users. Rather, application platforms are free to kind of lease out a chunk of the world computer and just sort of use it. Just you put a program on it and let the program run. And if the program decided that tokens weren't an important part of it, then they didn't need to introduce tokens, and the users could use it without the concept of tokens. And this, I think, is something that's going to be increasingly important as we move beyond the sort of crypto native users of these blockchain-based Web3 services out into the rest of the world, who aren't so bothered about owning Bitcoin or Ether and actually just want to use whatever service it is. So this was like a key element of Polkadot. But then secondly to this, we also wanted to introduce things like a real scalability, like the ability to run and secure many different different kinds of transactions all running at the same time, in very high throughput, and, you know, sort of the levels of throughput that we could really imagine a sort of a mainstream global application running at. And it so happened that we had an architecture, which we call parachains, sort of parachains architecture. Some other, they might also be known as heterogeneous shards. This is basically, you may be familiar with sharding already. This is essentially splitting, dividing and conquering, dividing the workload up into different work streams and then parceling it out around the network so that different computers can work on different work streams at the same time, and thereby allowing us to get much more work done in the same period of time, and in principle with the same overarching computers, overarching like validator nodes, working you know, under the same consensus rules. Now, in addition to this, the idea is that these individual sort of partitions of the network, these individual work streams, can be for different kinds of work. So we can now have one set of computers that are just working specifically on NFTs. They do NFTs. They can flip NFTs around. They can decide whether someone can issue, you know, all this NFT related stuff. Great. And in another work stream, we might do DeFi. And it's like, we're just doing DeFi, right? We're figuring out contracts for difference. We're figuring out liquidations. I don't know, all this kind of DeFi stuff. And another one, we might do attestations. We might do certifications. We might be handling, you know, hey, someone's actually had a booster shot or 2 booster shots for this particular, you know, COVID-19, what's it? And we can do each of these work streams in specialized environments that makes them go much faster than they would do if they were in a more general smart contract environment. And on top of all that, we can do them actually simultaneously. So we can have these work streams be worked on all at the same time. And that allows us to really ramp up the amount of performance that we get. And so really it was, you know, it was a jump, I would say at least as big as the jump from Bitcoin to Ethereum, where we sort of introduced a number of different pieces of functionality that sort of really set it apart. And that's really where we, really what I was trying to make that big leap between Ethereum and Polkadot as well.
So a couple of things I'll just kind of maybe, well, your technical ears will burn here, but like, bear with me. So when you think about all these different layer 1 protocols, right, just as for our listeners. So there are different ways you could think about interoperability. One would be, well, maybe we build something that kind of links between the different things. And so you can hop almost from one to the other. The other way would be to say, what lies underneath all of that? What is almost below or underneath of the base layer of all of that? So when Gav says layer 0, he's talking about something more fundamental. And so all of these other layer 1s can interact or intersect with something that sits really almost, you can think about it as on top of or underneath, doesn't really matter, but it's kind of a meta layer in a way. And that's kind of what was the approach I think that you took, which is really kind of brilliant. Instead of thinking about connecting everything, you're thinking about what is the underlying mechanism they all could kind of almost hook into. And then on sharding, the easiest way to think about this, I think, for people who aren't familiar with it, is something like SETI at home or folding at home, where you're kind of deploying a variety of different, you're using a massive network and you're basically saying, where can I create specialization? And then I can create economies of scale in a way, right? So you then have these things that are all running in parallel. It's important to know this is not an assembly line. They're not sequential. They're all running in parallel, but you're creating this kind of specialization that enables more efficiency. So that's kind of I think the brilliant innovation around parachains is that concept, but it's probably easiest understood as something like, for anyone who's ever done SETI at home or folding at home, you understand the power of using a little bit of your CPU to basically help this broader project. And then imagine if you could work on a specific part of that all the time, and you had a network working on that with you, and then others in the network were working on other things that were also important to the operations of the entire overall project. So I just wanted to lay out a couple of those things there, but it's absolutely fascinating. And there's clear links here into the philosophy you have around Web3. So maybe we can transition into that for a bit and say, you clearly were onto something with this idea that it isn't just about linking layer ones together or building another layer two that can make the layer ones faster or whatever, maybe link them through there. It was about looking at something more fundamental. And I loved what you said about almost the divorcing from the necessity of tokens, because tokens to some extent are what keep people there's a little, well, you could think about it like a trap in a way. You're kind of stuck in a particular system because you need the token in order to engage with the system. But if you remove that constraint, then there's even more user choice and freedom in how you interact with the protocol and what you can do with it. So maybe we can transition a bit into talking just about Web3 and how, which came first, your concept around Web3 is where, you know, did that led you to build all this amazing stuff? Or was it more that evolved in parallel as you observed what you thought was needed to make the system operate and function more smoothly and more efficiently and more freely? Chicken or egg, which came first?
I mean, I think when I think back to, like, you know, April 2014, this was before we had, certainly before Ethereum had you know, done its crowd sale. It was before we'd finalized the protocol. So it was pretty early days, and I could see that the way, if we wanted to allow people to, you know, deploy smart contracts in principle, like, you know, these Turing complete computer programs into Ethereum, the wider idea was to build decentralized applications. Like, that was there was we were still young then, you know, we were still things were still very much in flux, and ideas had yet to really crystallize. But generally speaking, we understood that we had this, you know, ability to do Turing complete computation on a decentralized system. And that meant that we could create, therefore, applications, like some kinds of applications, and they would become decentralized applications, unstoppable applications, whatever you want to call them. And it was when I thought about this sort of got me thinking, well, do we only need, is it just a function of Ethereum, or is this actually, does it need more than just Ethereum? Because I'd already, you know, I've been a technologist like all of my life that I can remember. And, you know, I started coding when I was 8 years old. I followed technological trends. And, you know, I've seen peer-to-peer, you know, I was around when there was the Napster revolution, followed by BitTorrent, you know. I've seen projects like, I don't know, Freenet and whatnot, like, you know, and then Bitcoin when it arrived. I was aware of, like, the concept of peer-to-peer technologies and how these offered an alternative to, you know, to more centralized architectures, the sorts of architectures, for what it's worth, that I was taught at university. It's like, you know, 98, 99, 2000, this is how the professors are teaching you how to architect software. And it was, you know, it was refreshing. I could also see how this could alter this could provide fundamental differences to what you could do with software and how and the guarantees that software gave you. Like, when you're talking about centralized software, your guarantees are only as good as the centralized entity that's running them. Yeah, because they can change anything they want and they don't have to tell you. So with decentralized software, you get these greater, stronger guarantees. And I could see that that was happening even before Bitcoin. But when, you know, Bitcoin and Ethereum came along, then I could see that, wow, you know, we can extend these guarantees into arbitrary rule sets, and that was quite impressive. That was very mind opening. But was it all that we needed? And even then I didn't think that it was. Like, I still felt there was a need for just a broader publication system, like something like Bittorrent, where you could actually say, here's a bunch of data to the world, and you could refer to that data in a cryptographically strong way. Similarly, something like a bit like sort of PGP, or, you know, over email, like something that allows us to send datagrams from one individual, one machine, one person to another, with guaranteed end-to-end encryption. Not end-to-end encryption like, yeah, WhatsApp kind of gives you end-to-end encryption, or they say they do, and, you know, you have to trust WhatsApp because you can't look at the software code. You can't see which keys are being used. No, actual end-to-end encryption that you can verify. So I could see that these were reasonable, like, useful services that we would need that were separate to the blockchain. And it was really from this that the idea of Web3 came from. It was the concept of an application platform that went beyond any individual technology. It went beyond Ethereum. It went beyond Bitcoin. It went beyond BitTorrent. It went beyond any of this stuff to give you a general smorgasbord of protocols and formats and technologies that you could pick and choose in order to create the decentralized service or application that you wanted to create, that you know, without having to be beholden to any individual platform. Because of course, if you're beholden to even if it's a decentralized platform, if you're beholden to just one, then there is still that level of centralization. You've still got centralization of mindset, centralization of potentially a software development team, centralization of governance, and all the rest of it. Then after, you know, Ethereum took a lot of my mind space for a few years, and then, but towards the end of I guess like mid 2016, late 2016, I got thinking about, you know, what will Ethereum 2 look like, and is there something that you know, maybe there is something that I can do that is separate to Ethereum, that is beyond Ethereum 2, that does something different. I didn't particularly want to like do Ethereum 2, but that wasn't Ethereum 2. I wanted to like see if I could present something to the world, sort of, so to speak, you know, under my own belt, and that's really where Polkadot came from. It was like, I didn't want to do like homogeneous sharding to make a smart contract platform be able to process more transactions per second. Rather, what I wanted to do is like see if we can explore new territory, and like, rather than making an existing product a bit faster, can we create a whole new class of products? Like, can we create something that hasn't been done yet? So that's where this heterogeneous sort of sharded multi-chain Polkadot came from. And it also seemed to me that because we could allow lots of different blockchains, different kinds of chains doing different kinds of things with different teams behind them and different economies, we could allow for experimentation in the direction of Web3 much faster. Because, you know, you don't want to settle on one particular set of design parameters immediately. And even Ethereum, with its Turing complete programming language, was still settling on one specific set of design parameters. You have to. And if you, the more that you can like enable many different design parameters to be tried out and tested in a real world environment, ideally plugged in securely, so that, you know, able to operate and interoperate, so that one doesn't have any sort of advantage over any other for legacy reasons, then we can find and quickly come to you know, better technology to act as the underlying one of the underlying systems for this like new horizon, Web3.
You know, Gabby, you talked there a little bit about sort of some of these inherent centralizing tendencies that go beyond just, you know, creating the smart contract platform and all these other aspects that need to be resolved. And, you know, Web3, which you really did help to popularize, has suddenly become a buzzword, and everyone's talking about it. And we've had some critiques come of that. You know, one, you've got Jack Dorsey sort of arguing that it's all about VCs and so forth, and he's in a sort of bit of a silly Twitter fight with Chris Dixon. But the one that really sort of, I think, had quite a bit of impact was Moxie Marlinspike's commentary recently. In my simplified, you know, version of it is simply that, you know, this sort of goal of peer-to-peer networks is never attainable because it's so inefficient for everybody to run their own web server, for example, that the sheer inefficiency of having so many nodes. You're obviously well aware of all those challenges, and this is part of what you're dealing with. So can you talk through what your retort to that would be and how Polkadot would be, you know, able to resolve that sort of fundamental inefficiency issue that comes with, you know, so many nodes having to manage their own stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we live in a world where convenience is king, and this must not be forgotten. But I think if the product is right, then we can make, in my mind, the question is, did people ever really want to run, was there ever any value in running your own website? Like, sure, in the early days, you have no choice but to run your own website. I remember doing it when I was like 16, 17. But, and then, you know, GeoCities came along. It's GeoCities, right?
Yeah, I think it was, right?
Yep.
Almost the very first. I remember that.
Well.
Still showing our age.
And you don't have to, you have to make, you know, you have to host your own web server. These guys will do it for you. Great. I mean, look, I'm all for, if the product is still good, if it fulfills what you need and it's convenient, great. That's product development. That's a good thing. But the question is, I don't think like that many people got much advantage from running that. Like, I think the product was effectively equivalent, whether you ran your own web server or whether you put it on GeoCities. It didn't matter. It was the same thing. Now, fast forward to present day, and how often does it go before you've heard of the next, you know, 50,000 credit cards have been leaked from some major institution? A bank has suffered a hack. A politician's emails have been hacked. Right. Our infrastructure is at the whim of the highest bidder, or the most what's the diplomatic word? Ruthless nation state. We cannot afford to base our infrastructure on fundamentally flawed centralized technologies. I mean, we literally cannot afford, like, civilization as we know it, the liberal order that the West has pioneered, will fail if we do this. Our democratic systems will crumble. Information will just increasingly become disinformation. Trust will be forever eroded. We need better systems, and this is really, in my mind, this is one of the you know, very important fixes to this. In some sense, what we're fixing isn't is like the ability for us to be able to have credible expectations about what our actions in the world, which is increasingly online, right? Our actions, by and large, whether it's with each other, companies or governments, it happens online. We no longer go to the post office to collect a pension. We no longer go to the bank to put in a deposit. It doesn't work that way. And we need to be, we've sleptwalked into this kind of situation where we're relying on this, you know, super centralized model that where the product simply isn't right. It's flawed. It's no good if the bucket is cheap and convenient, but it's got a hole in the bottom. So we are starting to realize that our various buckets have got holes in the bottom, and we need to look for buckets that don't. And so I think we're in a slightly different situation, and where we are as a civilization, we are as humanity starting to look for more like whole free buckets. And that what I think we're sort of at the moment, the whole free buckets, that they are kind of whole free, but they're very small and they don't carry as much water as we would like, and they're not very convenient. The handles are kind of a bit rubbish to carry. So we've got a way to go before our whole free buckets are going to be quite as good as the old ones, the not so well working ones. But we're on the path, and things are getting increasingly polished. We're seeing much better user experiences. We're seeing far higher levels of transaction throughput, and I think it's only really a matter of time before Moxie's sort of slight sad reckoning that convenience trumps everything, maybe even our own security. I think I've got a more optimistic view. I think that when it's becomes so clear that the new model is just a fundamentally better solution, it provides fundamentally better guarantees for your expectations than the old model, that it will drive developers, and it will drive user interface, user experience experts, and it will just basically drive everything towards better, like basing their technologies and their products and their solutions on this underlying less flawed technology. And just to sort of cap it, I mean, to take a specific example, we already, like, Ethereum is decentralized as far as the sort of blockchain goes. It's a terribly centralized application platform, right? If you want to use an Ethereum application, you go through MetaMask, right? Well, who's MetaMask? Well, MetaMask uses Infura. Well, who runs Infura? Well, it's a single company bankrolled by I don't know, maybe they've done an IPO recently, but whatever. It's a single company with a single CEO that can turn it off or get it wrong at any moment. Yeah. And this is sort of owing to, actually, I think Vitalik said something fairly similar. It's like, getting it properly decentralized is hard. We're working on it, but it's hard. And it's important that we don't lose sight of why we're doing all this in the first place. It needs to be decentralized. It's pretty much pointless if it's not. And one of the ways that we can ensure that that we get the right product is by ensuring that the technology is easy to integrate, that things like clients work, that they work in browser or they work within a web page, so that when it comes down to the user and using it on their mobile phone, using and loading up a web page, they see the same thing. It looks just like it did before. It's like a bank interface, or it's like a Twitter interface, or it's, I don't know, it's an interface that they recognize. Behind the scenes, it's doing all the heavy lifting. It's connecting to lots of peers. It's going and checking things. It's checking proofs and It's doing all of the important stuff. But that's stuff that technologists can build. What we need to make sure is that the product utilizes this technology gets built, and that users understand the difference between going to Facebook for their news and going to the decentralized I don't know, reputation, web of trust based news service that is probably yet to come.
Yeah, so you're preaching to the choir here about the need to do this. We spent a lot of time talking on this show about the dangers of what we've built as a society, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. What I suppose we're all trying to grapple with, and you clearly are going there, is like, what is the motive? What drives people in this space? And here's Moxie on the one hand saying convenience kills everything, and people are so willing, to your point, to just give up security for that. And you're arguing no, because I think there's a growing awareness and a growing need. I suppose the question I would have is, like, who actually is going to be the driving actors that push us to that model? And there's a couple of questions in that. Like, one is, it like, will just users just on their own migrate to decentralized systems and happily do so because they'll start to get awareness and, to your point, be educated about these issues? Or is it going to be a decision by policymakers who set rules and say, look, we can't run under the Facebook empire anymore. We've got to move over to this system where you can't be abused? Or do we build systems where, and this is, I think, one of the key challenges, where the business model is incentivizing people to go after this. Like, because this, we come back to this all the time, right? That ultimately what it really was Google who got there, realizing that there was this algorithmic functionality that they could apply to then extract data from all these users and sell that to advertisers. And it just became that feedback loop that was just so appealing to, to shareholders essentially. And that drove us as capitalism. How do we get to the same flywheel effect where investors are like, oh man, I want to get into that thing, but the payoff is not built around that extractive model. It's literally about creating this sort of opportunities at the base layer for users to take control, and that there's a business to be run on top of that that's profitable. I mean, do you guys think, at Polkadot, about who's going to come in and make money on top of this? And can you give us a sense of what that world looks like?
I mean, I don't think we don't really consider the specifics of who is going to make money from what. It's a little bit, we prefer to give people the tools, and the best tools that we can give them, and see what they can build and what they can bring to market. But more generally, to your point, I think it really is about alignment of incentives. And yeah, we saw that there became a sort of alignment of incentives between Google and its users, and its users sort of handed Google over their data for the free services. People like the free service. I still use the free service. Great services. And Google used the users' data, and it was in some sense very well aligned. But it was, I think, in retrospect, it was of questionable.
You mean it was evil?
I'm not sure if all of the users quite understood the ramifications of sharing their online activities, or indeed that they were sharing their online activities in such a way. But I wouldn't want to name Google as like the worst offender of all of them.
I'm going to side with you on that as well.
Fair.
But I think overall it is about alignment of incentives, and I think as incentives of I think our elected representatives, our lawmakers, if they are not already beginning to understand, will very soon begin to understand how important it is to architect our information society on technology that is not immediately susceptible to influence or breakage from foreign and maybe not well aligned entities. Mm-hmm. Similarly, I think what would you say, the broadly speaking thought leaders of society, I think are getting there as well. I think it still takes education, but for them to understand the difference between building things on flawed centralized systems and building things on decentralized systems that give legitimate guarantees. For the wider population that maybe don't think too much, don't want to think too much about it, I think I have an optimistic view, and I think that between the sort of let's say sort of government element and the thought leadership element, and the sort of fabric of society, if one side pulls, then and the rest isn't really against it, it sort of just tends to go along with it. The same way that sort of everyone eventually got on Facebook. It's like at the beginning of Facebook, not that many people were on it, and it was the sort of cool kids that figured out, like, wow, look, here's a Web2 thing, and it's kind of cool. You can share your photos and like tag people, and they got their friends and their family, and it sort of spread that way. And it wasn't, there was like an underlying service to it, but a lot of it was really just about following where the people that had had sort of introduced you to it, but following these cool kids. I think there is I think a lot of society kind of works on this, and especially if the government is sort of ushering people into the sorts of information hygiene that we really ought to be as a society aware of, then I think we've got a fighting chance.
And that's it, right? I mean, these things aren't mutually exclusive. You can have, and I was dragged from Friendster to Facebook kicking and screaming, but I eventually did migrate because people were just more on the one thing than the other thing, and then the other thing died, and then, there we were. But I do think it's a combination of these things. You can have a user interface that's very, convenient, quote unquote, and familiar to people that is back-ended by a decentralized system. And most people are not going to really know the difference or understand it. If they're presented with the choice, I think they're going to make the choice to have more agency, to be more empowered, to not have their engagement beholden to a centralized system. And the question, I think, from policymakers is going to continue to be, are you going to continue to prop up legacy systems that have very clear, known, exploitable flaws that are not really being fixed because the incentives are to bake those in and keep them? Or are you going to allow for the development of a better, and I think we're all in agreement on that, system that will have different, concerns that are raised, some of which are being addressed now, some of which are ridiculous, some of which are speculative, some of which we probably don't know yet, but is certainly addressing the core problems of what's come before, which is really not serving people and is putting way too much power. We're trying to go at this through antitrust is not really the solution. I think that's kind of where this has landed, right? To some extent, for those who really understand the challenges around having all this power centralized in one place, that tends to be their avenue of attack, but that doesn't solve the problem. Having 3 monopolists versus 1 is not really the solution. So you can have no monopolists. So I do think all these things are going to work together in concert. And like you say, my view has been for a while that we just didn't pay enough attention in the ecosystem to that convenience factor, like the familiarity people wanted to feel when they engage with these things. It was hard. It was really hard to understand it. It was hard to do. It's hard to do it safely. And then the perception of all of the risk you were engaging in and even doing it in the first place was a deterrent. But now that a lot of that is being solved, I think we're seeing more and more people waking up to, so I do get the benefits that everyone keeps talking about. I don't have to really understand them, but I know what they are, at least philosophically, and I support that. And the engagement model for me, the onboarding, all that is not as hard as it used to be. It's something I can get my head around. I can actually understand that. But I think it just remains to be seen, and where all of these things align, and what, like you said, I love the way you phrase that fabric of society. If there's not a lot of resistance on the other side, then maybe it's slow, but you can see this migration that I certainly think that we're starting to see get more and more momentum and acceleration behind. For sure. So I guess another question, right? So one of the things that comes up a lot that is for policymakers anyway, that leans the other way as well, at least with centralized systems, we know who to blame. Like we have identified, companies or people or whatever it is, and we know who to go after or who to hold accountable. So is the end game here that all just dissolves, that things are so decentralized, there really is no, lead developer, there's no founder, there's really nobody who's even like subpoenable or can be held to task or to account if things go wrong? Is that the goal? Or do you think that's inevitable? Or do you think that's almost impossible to achieve because there is so much pressure to have that identifiable group or person or entity or whatever it is?
Well, I certainly hope that they don't start holding lead developers accountable. I think we have to look a little bit deeper at what is the what reason, what would we hope to achieve by holding any particular individual accountable, and how does that fit into a new model of the world where we have potentially discord amongst within the world, like within the broader wider world, such that those individuals may not be the ones that are the more powerful entities at play. So what I'm kind of getting at is if we have an individual with limited actual effective power because they, maybe they're an influential figure, but the system in and of itself is decentralized, and we see that decentralized system being attacked by a far larger entity, is it reasonable to hold the individual to account because they didn't make it secure enough? In the same way that we would hold like a bank's CEO who has absolute power of everything that's in the bank, modulo the shareholder, whatever the shareholder agreement says, the same way that we would hold a bank CEO to task about what, maybe what some employees of the bank have been getting up to with, maybe in breach of regulations, or if the bank were attacked and its security systems were not found to be sufficiently strong. And in my mind, it's really, we have to take like a fairly pragmatic approach here about what it is that we're trying to solve. In my mind, the world as it stands, we have to accept that there are bigger, when we get to these levels of systems on which society as a whole is sort of working under, we have to understand that there are sort of the attack scenario isn't so much that the individual that is running the system is malicious. Maybe they're incompetent, or maybe there is some level of incompetence, but a lot of the time it's really simply down to the underlying centralized architecture of the human organization as much as the technological solution. And that's what gives rise to the ability for, nefarious, potentially quite well financed, powerful actors to sort of break it and corrupt it for their own means. So overall, I think from what I've seen of the regulators over the last like 6 to 12 months, I think it's not an unreasonable sort of line that they're taking, which is basically that if it's legitimately decentralized, there isn't an individual or an organization that's actually exercising true like power over the system, then we will accept the system as like kind of a force of nature. And if we have a problem with something that happens in it, then we will go after the individuals that are actually making that thing happen, like the individuals like, I don't know, making the transactions or whatever it is.
The actual bad actors, yeah.
Rather than try and like shut the system down, which may not be practical anyway.
I think this opens up a whole other line of inquiry here, because there's like, how do we define what risk is and what is the best model for society? Like, and the nice thing about open decentralized systems is that they evolve. They to Nazim Taleb's idea, right? It evolves to an anti-fragile state. That's where you want to actually have this. So if you have this sort of mindset that I'm going to shut it all down if it gets risky, then you're actually not leveraging all of that innovative power that comes from that system. So I think one of the biggest challenges we face is actually a shift in mindset. I think that the whole security, the OPSEC kind of idea of building firewalls and just making bigger and bigger ones around centralized honeypots that hackers just inevitably figure out how to get over every time, is just a race to the bottom that's costing us so much money. And therefore we have to let go of it, right? We have to recognize that it's the economics of security that need to change as much as anything else, and that out of that better systems will come. That I think is a big leap though, right? Because I think we've been stuck in this Web 2 mindset, and we've got an enormous amount, to my point earlier about, of business interests that have built business models around this concept. And to your point, CEOs who are sort of completely obsessed with that responsibility as well, right? So it's got a long way to go, but I'm with you. I hope that the penny is dropping. I can use that term because I've got an Englishman here who knows it. Americans get confused by the word the penny drop. You have to say light bulb.
I get confused by that.
Well, because you're an international, but like, there's weird looks to people. Like, what do you mean by penny drop? Anyway, the penny is dropping. I think there is an awareness that's starting to happen in the world. Let's hope we move fast enough to get there. And Gavin, keep sort of working as hard as you can, along with everybody else in this space to build the systems that get us there. So we have to call it short right now. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to having you at Consensus in June. I think we're looking at having a Polkadot presence there is going to be fun. And we'll have to do this again sometime on Money Reimagined. So thanks very much.
Thanks
awesome.
so much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Sheila.